Just over a year ago, anti-terrorism police turned up at the home of Tony Greenstein in the English seaside town of Brighton and questioned him over a tweet he had posted saying he supports the Palestinian resistance group Hamas against the Israeli army. He was arrested and released on restrictive bail conditions, but he was not charged at the time. But just a few weeks ago, the Crown Prosecution Service charged Greenstein under the notoriously repressive and anti-democratic Terrorism Act 2000, accusing him of expressing an opinion or belief that is supportive of a proscribed organization. This serious charge could result in a prison sentence of up to 14 years. And of course, Tony Greenstein is not the only activist and journalist in the UK to face home raids, police investigations, arrest, or charges connected with their work or opinions related to Palestine. Tony Greenstein is a socialist and a Jewish anti-Zionist and anti-racist campaigner. As well as publishing articles at his own website, Tony will be familiar to readers of the Electronic Intifada for the articles he has contributed to us over many years. A veteran campaigner for Palestinian rights, Tony is the author of the book Zionism During the Holocaust, the Weaponization of Memory in the Service of State and Nation. He joined the Electronic Intifada podcast to talk about that book after it was published in 2022, and you can find that interview on the website and on the Electronic Intifada YouTube channel. But before you go off and look for that, we're delighted to have Tony join us live now on the Electronic Intifada live stream. Welcome,
Hi,
Tony.
Yeah, hello. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to see you, and may I say happy birthday?
Oh, right. Thank you very much. A young 71.
Oh, you're just a baby.
I'm listening to Nora. The news is, of course, extremely depressing. What stood out for me, given what I've written, is the fact that they are writing numbers on the prisoners that they take. Because, of course, this is what the Nazis did at Auschwitz. And for the Zionists now to be imitating what the Nazis did says really everything about their campaign in Gaza. They are, if you like, the reflective image of the historic persecutors of the Jews. And it really reminds me of what Primo Levi was reputed to have said, which is that the Palestinians are the Jews of the Israelis.
Well, thank you very much for that, Tony. And we'll have a few minutes to come back to some of those very unfortunate historic parallels. But let's first talk about your own case, and then we'll talk about the bigger picture as well. You appeared at a hearing on the 19th of December at Westminster Magistrates Court in London. Mm. Tell us what happened in that hearing and what is happening next with your case and how you're planning to fight it.
Okay, well, I was summoned by the police on, I think it was the 22nd of November, to be told they would be pressing charges. And then my first hearing was at the Magistrates Court at Westminster, which is an anti-terrorist court. It's the only magistrates court, I think, in England, which deals with so-called terrorism. And I was formally charged, and then I was bailed with the same restrictions I've been under, which is I've got to notify the police if I don't sleep at my house, and I'm not supposed to comment or mention Hamas on Twitter. I've been banned actually from Twitter, so that doesn't really apply. And now I've been remanded on the 31st of January to the Old Bailey, which will presumably farm it out to another Crown Court. There are only 3 Crown Courts which can deal with terrorism cases. That's the Old Bailey itself, Kingston Crown Court, and which is the other one, Woolwich. So there are 3. I'm not sure which, if it matters particularly, but anyway, the case will go ahead. I think I've also been charged with inviting support for Hamas. Incidentally, I didn't say I support Hamas as a resistance movement, but I said I support Hamas as part of the resistance, which I think is a different thing, really. I mean, I don't personally. I mean, I'm a Jewish atheist, so I wouldn't support Hamas in itself, but I recognise it's part of the resistance, and I support the Palestinian resistance. There's also the Popular Front's brigade, Ahmad Sadat, I think it is. There's a Democratic Front, there's Islamic Jihad, and there may be others as well. So I support the right of the Palestinians to resist, which is, of course, an international law right as well. But the British government doesn't recognise it because it's supporting the genociders. So I await battle. We really have to see. It's impossible to predict what the outcome will be, but obviously I have pled not guilty, and battle lies ahead. But I mean, really, whatever happens to me, it pales into comparison with the description of what you have said, which is really hell on earth. It's Dante's Inferno, what Israel is doing. It's a complete ignoring of international law. It's as if international law, all the conventions that were drawn up after the Second World War, after the Holocaust, have just been dispensed with. And we see really imperialism on the march. And it doesn't matter who gets in the way, they will behave exactly as they wish. And there is no restraint at all on them. The system that we live under has shown itself to be a completely amoral system. It has no codes of behavior at all. And it doesn't surprise me that Germany, which supplies, I think, 30% of Israeli weapons, is smiling upon the new Holocaust, because really there hasn't been a Holocaust that Germany hasn't smiled upon and approved, whether it's in Southwest Africa, Tanganyika, Armenia, which they were involved in, or now today Israel's Holocaust. So really, as far as they're concerned, one Holocaust justifies another, and that is the morality. And of course, being Jewish, it's a good experience in a sense, because anti-racist and anti-Zionist Jews are invisible to the authorities that be. I was arrested on the 4th of October, protesting outside Zippy Hotovely, the Israeli ambassador to London's residence, because I made the comparison between the Nazis and the Zionists. Well, I'll be going back there on the 3rd of January, this Friday, and I'll be making exactly the same comparisons and inviting the police to arrest me again. I mean, I was arrested, but I was released, and they said they were not proceeding with charges. So we have to fight. It's as simple as that.
But Tony, that's all extremely well put. But you are facing a possible prison term. I looked at the Terrorism Act 2000 yesterday, and at the specific section you're charged under, and it says that the offence you're charged with is punishable by prison for up to 14 years.
Well, I don't think with a first offence I'll get 14, but I think it's highly likely, being as I'm under a suspended sentence for a Palestine Action outing a year ago, that I will get a prison sentence. But obviously, I will be appealing to the jury to acquit, because the main argument will be that this is not about terrorism. This is about freedom of speech, the right to speak out on Palestine, the right to speak out about a genocide that's happening in real time. And that's, however important the law is, there is a more fundamental right, which is the right to speak openly in a democratic society. And that's what's under attack today. Whether they're receptive to those arguments, I simply don't know. It's an unknown. Obviously, it's a worry. It must be to anyone. But really, that's the price you pay for liberty in the end.
Incredible.
Yeah, well, what you've just said is really, you've boosted my morale actually a little bit there, because there doesn't seem to be any stopping you, despite the fact of potentially very serious consequences. Well, we definitely wish you all the best with that, Tony. And
well, thank you very much.
We'll be following developments very closely.
I mean, there was a good demonstration outside the Westminster Court, about 100 people. They made a lot of noise and so on. And I'll be calling for a demonstration on the 31st, Friday, I think it is the 31st of January. And I'll be seeking to build a kind of defence campaign and have public meetings. And to make the most of this, we can't allow the state to get away with secretly locking up people after trials where the judge will rule out defences, no doubt. And that's, if you like, a battle that lies ahead. But we have to make the most of it and show what the system is when it comes down to it. Democratic rights are really for sale to the highest bidder. That we don't really live in a democracy. Those with power and influence preside, and we have a very limited democratic rights, but we have to fight for them. They're not given. They've been fought for by past generations, and we cannot take them for granted. It's as simple as that.
Right, so Friday the 31st of January in the morning is when anyone who wants to support you before your trial at the Old Bailey in London, anyone who can turn out for that, please do. Let's talk about the broader context of the prosecution you're facing. The same week that you were arrested in December 2023, Mick Napier of the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign was arrested as well as a protest in Glasgow just after he gave a speech supporting the Palestinian right to resist. In mid-August, the British journalist Richard Medhurst was arrested on arrival at London's Heathrow Airport, detained under the Terrorism Act 2000, and had his phone and recording devices that he used for his journalism seized. And later that same month, of course, police also raided the home of Sarah Wilkinson, a Palestine Solidarity activist with a large social media following, which was also reportedly in relation to content she posted online. And then, of course, as regular viewers and listeners will know, in October, police raided my home and seized my electronic devices in an investigation of social media postings is all that they would say to me. They didn't give me the exact reasons. And the police still have my devices. But I had the slight difference there is I was never arrested and I haven't yet to be charged with anything. So, we'll see how that goes. And then the next incidence of this, on the 1st of November, the British police arrested Professor Chaim Brishith, a Jewish anti-Zionist, after he gave a speech near the official residence of the Israeli ambassador in London. Brishith is the son of Holocaust survivors and says that the police told him he was being arrested under the Terrorism Act, and I believe he was held overnight and released in the early hours of the next day. A very strange sort of incident, but part of this pattern of repression. And he was thankfully, subsequently, he was told he wouldn't be charged with anything. And I believe, I watched that playback of that speech that he gave, and he, it was very sort of neutral what he said. It was very blandly factual. Like, he simply said that Israel, well, maybe I shouldn't even report what he said, but this is the effect that this has. I'm questioning, should I even? People could check out the speech, but what he said was that Israel has been unable to defeat Hamas and Hezbollah. So it wasn't saying that was a good or a bad thing. He merely said that is what has happened, and that's it seemed to be that's what they picked up on, but you never really know for sure. But in any case, Tony, do we know how many people are facing this kind of oppression? And because obviously, where some of the more public-facing cases of this, how many people do you think are facing this kind of oppression, and what do you think the British authorities are trying to achieve, and is it working?
It's impossible to know because only the DPP will have those statistics. I imagine between
and that's the official prosecutors, the DPP,
the Director of Public Prosecutions. Only they and the police will know, but I imagine it's at least 20 to 30. It may be more. It's really difficult to tell. I have been contacted by some people who are not public names. So what is their purpose? I think it's to control the narrative. I mean, they have the mainstream, of course, press, the liberal so-called Guardian and the rabid Tory press on their side. But they know, thanks to social media and the internet, that an alternative message has been getting out, because there are still massive demonstrations every month on the streets of London and demonstrations everywhere around Britain. And they cause problems for the authorities. We know that 5 independent MPs were elected in general election with a mass disaffection, especially amongst Muslim voters, but not just Muslim voters. So I think it really is trying to control what is being said. And what they do, of course, is use this bogus allegation of terrorism, because, of course, it's got nothing whatsoever to do with terrorism. We know that Hamas has never planted a bomb in England or anywhere else outside Palestine. It's engaged in armed resistance. And so when you classify it as terrorist, you're doing really no different from what the Nazis did when they classified the French resistance as terrorist. The one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, as Lord Carrington said. So, I mean, that's what it is. It's clearly political. It's got nothing to do with the law. And ironically, we see with Syria, where a proscribed organization, HTS, is in control of the government, or in control of Damascus anyway, and parts of Syria. There have been all sorts of comments in media about how they've changed, how they're no longer like Al-Qaeda was, and so on, which are clearly supportive, including by the ex-MI5 chief. I think it's John, no, I can't remember his name, but all sorts of people, including the BBC. But I'm not aware that any of them have been arrested. So
yeah, and the Foreign Office as well, that David Lammy's subordinates from the Foreign Office have gone to actually meet with Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, the sort of strongman, former ISIS and Al-Qaeda leader, who's sort of de facto in charge of the country.
Well, maybe when they come back to Britain, they'll be greeted at the airport by the anti-terror police and held, and their devices will be seized, and they will be told they've got to give their PIN numbers and all sorts. I mean, we live in hope, but of course we know that won't happen because they exercise their discretion as to where and at whom they direct these charges. But I mean, that's what we're living in. We are sleepwalking into a police state, and it's up to us to resist it, to awaken, if you like, from our slumbers.
Indeed. Tony, we mentioned the wonderful conversation we had with you on the Electronic Intifada podcast a couple of years ago about Zionism during the Holocaust, and the book that you wrote, meticulously researching the role that Zionists
one of our highest viewed videos
that's
of all
right.
time.
Of all time. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's right. For those of you, and you know, feel free to kind of contextualize this into what we're seeing now. As you mentioned, you know, these policies, you know, the writing of numbers on people's bodies by Israeli soldiers on Palestinians, these acts of humiliation, these acts of just sadistic torture day in and day out. They're not aberrations. They're very much, you know, following this pattern of what Zionism is and what it has always been. Can you, you know, for those of our audience who are new to the topic, can you give us an overview of the historical relationship between the Zionist movement and the Nazis, and why you think it's important to keep talking about this today as we're seeing what's unfolding in Gaza?
Yes, for sure. I mean, in that the Zionists in Germany were just 2% of the German Jewish population, and they alone never fought the Nazis before they came to power. And as soon as they came to power, the Zionist leadership, and I don't talk about the mass of their supporters in New York who are completely oblivious as to what the nature of their own movement was, but the Zionist leadership welcomed the Nazis to power. They saw in it a golden opportunity, to quote Bill Katznelson, for their own movement, because they knew in times of peace they could not move the Jewish masses to support Zionism. Zionism everywhere was a minority movement. But the advent of Hitler presented them with those golden opportunities. It stimulated the emigration of Jews from Nazi Germany, and 50,000 of them went to Palestine. And of course, the anti-Semitism in other places like Poland did similarly. So Zionism and anti-Semitism were twins of a kind. They went together. Without anti-Semitism, there is no Zionism. And so when the mass of Jews boycotted everything German without exception, and there was a massive consequence. It was a weakening of the Nazis. I mean, there was speculation they wouldn't last the winter of 1933. And the Zionists were horror-stricken because that's the last thing that they wanted. So they agreed to a transfer agreement called Havara in August 1933, which broke the boycott of Nazi Germany, because what they were doing was selling the German goods in Palestine and then elsewhere as well. They became the marketing agents for Nazi Germany. And 60% of the foreign investment in the Zionist economy between 1933 and 39 came from Nazi Germany. So, I mean, in a sense, I mean, I said, I mean, it was an off-the-cuff remark in a Palestine Expo meeting 5 years ago that Israel was Hitler's bastard offspring, which, of course, the Jewish Chronicle leaped upon, I mean, as if to say notorious anti-Semite or notorious anti-Zionist has once again gone and made these outrageous remarks. But it's true. I mean, Zionism never had any quarrel with the Nazis or with anti-Semitism. I mean, Rabbi Kashtiel is of the Eli pre-military yeshiva in Israel, blurted out a few years ago, it's a Jerusalem Post headline, that Hitler was right. But then he said, but he got the wrong target. But of course, there were no Palestinians in Nazi Germany, so they had to make do with Jews. And that is the Zionist attitude, that fundamentally there was nothing wrong with targeting a particular minority in Germany. I mean, Jacob Klatskin said, if we object to anti-Semitism, then we must object to our own nationalism. I mean, the Zionists believed that it was quite understandable that the Jews, who they said were homeless, they were an alien element, that the host nations objected to them. And so Zionism has taken on board that, if you like, ideology. So when people say that, well, Israel is behaving like it does because of Holocaust trauma, I say, well, that's nonsense. Israel does what it does because it's a settler colonial state. And it started off with ethnic cleansing, just like the Nazis did. The Nazis didn't start off with extermination. That wasn't in their program at all. But the one leads to the other, an ethnic cleansing. If you can't do it, it leads to genocide. And that's what we're seeing in Gaza, a combination of ethnic cleansing and genocide. You know, I mean, when Palestinians used to call Israel's behavior a Holocaust, I used to say, no, let's not exaggerate. Let's not indulge in hyperbole. But today, it is true. It is a Holocaust. What else can you call it?
Exactly.
And of course, now, you know, when you see that context, which you've done so much to educate people about in your writing and in your interviews and discussions, including that incredible people who are looking for more detail and more in depth, please go to our 2022 discussion with Tony Greenstein. But what we see now is that the German government's support for this Zionist Holocaust in Palestine is not a discontinuity. It is a continuation of the Nazi Zionist alliance, effectively, that goes right back to the beginning. And it's something that of course, Zionists hate people talking about. They hate it when you talk about it. They hate it when people know it. But it's incredibly important history with real resonance today. Tony, we just have a couple of minutes left with you
Sure.
today. Hopefully, this is only the first of many more discussions to come with you on the live stream. But you're a veteran campaigner and readers of your blog, and I'm an avid reader of your blog, know that you are an astute analyst, often perceiving political trends before others do. You're not always right, but you're more often right than you are wrong, I have to say, from the from looking back over the years. As you look ahead to 2025, are there any lessons you think we can draw from the last year, the last 15 months of this genocide, about how to stay motivated and how to stay active? What can you share with us? And I also want to ask you to share with us, you mentioned efforts you're doing to support your legal fight and the legal fights of others. So also say something about that, because I know people will be asking how they can support what you're doing.
Well, I have a crowdfunder which people are welcome to support. You can Google it. I won't give you links now. I think in terms of what we can do, given the experience of the last 15 months, I just have to say, really, that we have to continue doing what we're doing and increase it. There is no magical solution, but I think in terms of what is happening in the Middle East, I think we do need to draw some lessons. It is clear that the so-called axis of evil, or axis of resistance, sorry, I'm using Netanyahu's language there, has not been a success. In a sense, you cannot rely on any of the Arab regimes in order to build support for the Palestinians. It has to rely, in the end, on the Arab masses, the Arab street. And what Israel has been able to do is reinforce a whole network of repressive Arab regimes. And tragically, that has included the Palestinian Authority, which is doing so much to prove itself to Israel and to Trump today. So we have to adopt a particular perspective. I have to say that it's important to understand that the struggle is a secular one. It's not a religious one. Zionism paints what it does in religious colors. And I do think, and I know I've been accused of being a Hamas supporter, but I do think it's a mistake to portray it as an Islamic struggle for a whole number of reasons I don't have time to go into. The struggle is one for national liberation, but it's also for Arab national liberation. And we have to see it in terms of the overthrow of the Saudi, the Egyptian, and all the other repressive Gulf regimes that dot the Arab world. I mean, there's only really one bright exception, and that is the Houthis in Yemen. And what they have done has been magnificent, but they are the exception to the rule. So, I mean, I think we have to cast our net wider. The Palestinians will continue. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Israel will still find it hard, but there is a war taking place in the West Bank that we haven't seen ever since the occupation, really. I know because I work closely with a children's centre in Jenin. It is now a war, and outrageously, the Palestinian Authority are now continuing that war. Words really don't describe the treachery of Abbas and the Palestinian Authority. And I have to say, I expect Palestine's Solidarity campaign, both in Britain and elsewhere, to completely dissociate themselves from Israel's military subcontractor. There is no longer any justification for not speaking out about Abbas and his quisling administration.
And just yesterday, of course, Palestinians have been mourning the journalist Shada Sabah, who was killed by a Palestinian Authority gunman, according to the reports, in Jenin refugee camp. A truly horrific incident that underscores the role the Palestinian Authority is playing on behalf of Israel. Tony, you raised a lot of intriguing points there that are rich for a discussion, and I hope we'll have you back to talk about them more. And I know that I'll continue reading your thoughts and your articles, and we'll be watching this trial closely. And we send you all our support and thanks for standing up courageously and really showing us the way in terms of your unwillingness to be bowed and cowed into submission by the repression of the British state.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I have to be off now because we have a picket in Brighton town centre on what's happened to the Kamal Adwan hospital. So, but again, thank you very much for your support and onward to victory.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Thanks,
Good
Tony.
luck to you,
Thank you,
and
Tony.
keep up the great work.
I will. I'll do my
Thank
best.
you. Thanks.
Thanks.